Hey there everyone, welcome back to the Dan Cave and welcome to part 2 of the Belkits Metro 604 24th scale. So, it's been quite a few weeks since part 1 came out. If you've seen my bench update, you've kind of seen why things have been busy. However, part 2 is here now. So part 1 covered the bodywork, decals, paint, 2K, also got the engine put together, which is great. Kind of thought at the time, yeah, part 2 will be fairly straightforward, just kind of chassis, running gear, interior, final assembly. What I completely forgot is how much detail there is in this kit. So part 2, there is a huge amount packed in. Now I've tried to keep it as condensed as possible. I think I've achieved that. Probably not as, not as detailed a video as I would have liked, but I thought it was important to get it done and get it out there. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff condensed into this part, but it does get there and it does get to the end. So sit back and relax and enjoy the video, and I'll be back at the end for some final thoughts. And we are off straight in with some brush painting on the chassis, which is pretty much where I picked up, where I left off from the last part, which is the engine's been installed. There's a few little areas which need a little bit of brush painting, just add some detail. And then some of the parts on the chassis can get assembled. So drive shaft is going in. And then prop shaft. Well, prop shaft has gone in and drive shafts are going in for the rear. So there is a wash added to the engine as well. So using a dark wash from MIG Ammo just helps highlight some of the details on the engine, which is absolutely fantastic. So onto the running gear. There is a load of parts for running gear. Lots of suspension parts, got brake discs, suspension, shock absorbers, etc. So as is usual, all of those will be over and primed. Majority of them get primed in UMP black primer, as seen here. A couple of coats is laid down on each part, and the skid plates for the underside as well, they also get primed in UMP black. So it's a case of just laying down certainly a light coat at first, and then with the UMP black you can normally go a little bit heavier on the second coat, and then third coat if you need it. So you've got parts like the rear diff assembly as well, that's getting primed in black. Brake discs and brake calipers. And once that primer is dry, you can go back in with an appropriate metallic color for the rear diff, which I think is steel from recollection. And then I think I've used aluminium for a lot of the other components, such as the hubs and suspension, shock absorbers, etc. So working my way around all the parts and getting them painted up. So the skid plates for the underside do come with decals as well. So there's Kevlar decals to go on both parts for the front and rear. The rear, of course, includes a kind of diffuser assembly as well. And there's separate decals for those parts as well. So it's the usual decal process. Warm water, release them from the backing paper, a little bit of heat, a little bit of decal solutions. And these decals from Belkits are absolutely fantastic and they conform absolutely perfectly. So once that's set aside to dry, and all the paintwork is dry on the other parts that were done, it's time to start assembling the rear suspension in this case. There's quite a few parts to it. These parts actually don't glue in place. They're free to move. In some ways it does make the assembly a little bit easier. And then for the brake discs, there is some photo etch discs to go on them as well. Again, another excellent extra included from Belkits. So once I'm happy they're all firmly glued in place, you can pop in the poly cap and attach the brake assembly to the suspension arm and hub. So all of that piece sits kind of aside the drive shafts on the engine, and that lower kind of subframe then glues in place, and then the top of the shock absorbers then glues into the chassis, and that all pops in very, very nicely. Perfect fit. So again, similar kind of assembly for the front, except you've got the movable front wheels. I will say the connecting arm for the steering is quite flimsy, so do be careful. If there is a little bit of friction, it could be easily broken when moving the front wheels. But again, all of that goes in place nicely, and the underside skid plates can go in place as well. And that is pretty much nearly all the running gear done at this stage. So it's time to move on to the interior. So, as I said in the intro, there's actually a huge part count for this kit. There's a lot of stuff on the interior. It's not just your basic tub and two seats. There's pretty much a part for everything. Fire extinguishers, wheel brace, various kind of wash bottles and liquid bottles for the rear engine assembly, some vent tubing. There's tiny little attachments where the seatbelt harnesses will attach on the rear bulkhead. So lovely, nice little touches from Belkits. But before any of that assembly can be done, I'm just going to do a little bit of brush painting in around the back of the engine bay area of this chassis tub, because it's just so much easier just to brush paint some of these parts. Masking will be an absolute nightmare for some of these. So just using Revell Aqua paint with a very fine brush. So all of the parts for the interior are getting primed. A lot of them are getting primed in UMP white, mainly because they're going to end up in bright colors. And then things like the seats get primed in UMP black. And in fact, they'll probably just be left in UMP black, because it's a reasonably slightly sheened matte black. Not quite semi-gloss, but not quite matte. So once all those parts have had time for paint to cure, it's time to start working on the seat belts themselves. I like the Belkit seat belts. The material they provide fits nicely through the photo etch parts. I've had issues with the Hasegawa ones in the past where it's been a very tight fit. In this case, they slot through very, very easily. The only issue with getting them through is my sausage fingers. But as you can see, that buckle goes through relatively easy. Once it's in place, I can just move it on to the desired location I need on the harness. And then once I'm happy with the buckle end, use some double-sided tape just to fold over the end and press into place. Now, as with all kind of seat belts, it's worth leaving them a little bit over length where possible, because that allows you to trim them to the correct length for installation. And it is, of course, worth mocking up the seats in their actual location in the car, because that will help you get a more precise length, particularly as the harnesses go back onto the rear bulkhead, as mentioned earlier. So once I'm reasonably happy with how certainly the seat part of the harnesses are, use some double-sided tape just to attach them to the actual seat back itself. And a little bit later, they'll get mocked up and installed in the car and trimmed. And then the final attachment brackets or attachment buckles will be put on the ends. So rest of the harnesses go together a similar way. With that in mind, all those parts are primed earlier, need a little bit more painting. So things like the fire extinguishers will obviously be in red. So get some red paint down on them. So I'm using some Revell Aqua thinned with UMP thinners. It goes down pretty easy, pretty straight away. I've got some yellow for wheel brace. Again, I think that's Revell Aqua yellow, thinned with UMP thinners. A couple of coats of that. And those parts look absolutely fine. So once all the parts are fully painted up, it's time to start assembling the interior. So there is a pretty big part count. It's worth being kind of methodical, check the instructions, make sure you get all those parts. Because no, for me, there's nothing worse than going, 90% through kind of assembling the interior and realized you missed a tiny little part that needs to be primed and painted. So it is worth kind of going through the instructions a couple of times, make sure you've got all the parts you need, get them all primed, get them all painted, get them all detail painted wherever necessary, and then you end up with basically a nice little afternoon of just assembling all those interior components. And the interior components on this kit are very, very nicely molded. The fit is excellent. They all slot into place perfectly. We got some photo etch seat rails as well. Not really functional. They don't actually attach to the seat. They more sit outside the seat. But however, they get glued in with some CA glue, and then the seats themselves can be popped in as shown. And of course, if you get your measurements correct, those backs of the harnesses should just clip around uh, the little hooks that are provided and molded on the plastic kit itself as separate parts that need to be painted, of course, but they are there. And I think that's a nice little additional detail touch from Belkits. Then, of course, there's parts like the dashboard. So most of the detail work on that was done off screen. So they've been painted up, a few decals on them, some detail paints for switches and things like that. Got the nice addition of the CB mic and coiled cable as well. And then, of course, the steering wheel and steering arm get slotted into place, and a little bit of CA glue popped on the back just to secure that firmly in place. Once that's all done, dashboard then pops on top of the interior tub, sits in quite nicely. Nice, good, positive location as well. And then, of course, the door cards can also be installed as well. Now, some of the tubing for the roll cage is actually molded in, but it's molded so the roll cage is actually the same color as the seat cards in this case, so easy enough to paint and prime and paint. So once all those parts are in place, that interior tub can then get glued to the chassis, which we saw completed earlier. So there is a little bit of maneuvering needed here. You just need to make sure that you clear the ignition wiring that's on the engine. Maybe just use a pair of tweezers as I'm doing just to pull them out of place. Make sure it all slots through. And really that's the only area that fails in any way. And then once again, that interior tub has got positive location on the chassis and just pops into place. So then there are a whole host of additional parts which get fitted in and around the engine bay. Numerous brackets, bottles. I assume there's things like brake reservoirs, coolant reservoirs, things like that. But there's a whole host of parts to be added in, all of which have been primed, painted, and then detail painted as necessary. And then there's a couple of decals to go on the air intake box with the Austin logos on them. The roll cage itself gets fitted across the clear screen that sits between the engine bay and the passenger compartment. Again, a little bit of tweaking just to get all that fitted in place. So with all that done, there's a whole host of other parts that need to be primed as well. So there's a lot of stuff to go on the exterior as well. There's lots of photo etch grills. There's things like this, which is the mount for the aerial. There's the windscreen, which has got a mask included because the outer edge of the windscreen is in semi-gloss black, essentially. And then there's a variety of parts like windscreen wipers, the mesh, grill mesh, as I mentioned earlier. So all these parts get primed in UMP black primer, and the majority of them will just be left in UMP black primer. So with all that interior work done, it's time to get back to the bodywork and begin the process of flattening it back. So 2K went down really well. A couple of dust spots, nothing significant, but it's the usual process that I do using some micro mesh, 6, 8, and 12,000, I think. Uh, yeah, 6, 8, and 12. So a little bit of water, wet sand, constantly cleaning off the surface to look at it as you go, but essentially just removing any of those dust spots and just flattening back that polished surface. And of course, once this flattening back stage is finished, it'll be time to move on to the compounded polish. So using the UMP polishing system, starting with the number 1 compound. Again, that removes any of the heavier scratch marks from the flatting stage and begins to bring back that nice shiny gloss finish. So working my way around the body. So I'm using cotton buds this time because there's a lot of kind of smaller areas to get in and around on this kit. Using the cotton bud just to work that polish into the surface and then buffing it off using basically a glass cleaning cloth. So working my way all the way around the body. And once all that polishing is finished, you can get on to assembling some of the components that go on the inside, like the headlights. Shown here being applied with some CA glue. All the kind of internal grills and meshes can be added as well. The windscreen, of course, can be added. The windscreen is the only part of the glass that needs to be fitted from the inside. Once that's in place and the grills are in place, you can assemble the body onto the chassis and interior. And it fits perfectly snugly in. No major dramas. And it pops just in place, just like that. So once that's in place, you can start adding the remaining of the bodywork parts, such as the rear spoiler. You can add in the rear windscreen using some glue and glaze, PVA base glue. That'll be strong enough to hold it in place, and it dries clear as well. Now, there's plenty of PE parts to be added. There's some PE mounting points for the front spoiler. So front spoiler then gets mounted to the bumper and both get mounted to the front of the chassis like so. And once again using some CA glue here for that firmer hold. So once all those parts of PE are put in place, external windows are in place, you can add the lights as well. So you've got the rear, possibly fog lights. So once again, a little bit of PVA glue. And the light fitting can get popped in place as shown. And just repeat that for all the pieces of glass. Things like the rear light cluster with the indicator and brake light on. That pops in place just like so. Wheels can also be added at this stage. So with the front, of course, you need to be a little bit more careful because the front tends to be a little bit more fragile than the rear. Plus, it can move about a bit because it is a posable steering. There's some decals to go on the external glass work as well. So they're added using the normal kind of decaling process. Some warm water. Not too much decal solutions used on the glass because you don't want to damage the glass work itself. Well, clear plastic, really. But once again, using cotton bud just to squeeze out any excess moisture from underneath that decal. The fit is pretty good from Belkits here. The decals are cut very, very accurately. So they fit very, very nicely. And then, of course, there's a few additions like the rally plate for the rear. And, of course, the sun strip for the front. And again, that's perfectly cut decal, fits absolutely spot on in place. So with all that done, the kit is now complete. So these are the final photographs. Really, really pleased with how this has come out. Really enjoyable kit to build. Lovely amount of detail. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of time involved with all that detail. Everything needs to be painted, of course, and that just takes up a huge amount of time. But the final result is well worth it. So I'm really pleased with how this has come out. And absolutely iconic car as well. So back to me for final thoughts. That's the Belkits 6R4 completed in 24th scale. So all I can say is just it's a wonderful kit. Little bit of fit issue with the engine getting into the chassis. To be honest, beyond that, nothing wrong with the kit. To be honest, absolutely spot on. Now, myself and someone else have debated the kind of price point of Belkits in the past. For me as a rally fan, I think they're well worth it. They produce subjects that no one else is producing. They're producing good kits. The box comes packed with photo etch masks, seat belts, all that kind of stuff. So for me, it's spot on. I think their most recent offerings, the price has been creeping up. Makes me question whether they still are completely 100% value offered. But you know, if no one else is offering it and you want that kit, that's your only choice. So yeah, so for me, this kit's been a winner all the way. Really pleased with the build, really pleased with how it came out. Hopefully the video has done it justice. Probably not gone into this video building as much depth as I have in some other build series, mainly because it was done quite a while ago. I've got a bit of a backlog now of video builds I need to get through, so editing them down to this length of video actually kind of helps make them quicker to edit, quicker to get out there. So I may catch up at some point. But there we go, that's it. So if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe, don't forget to like the video, and feel free to leave a comment. Other than that, thank you everyone for watching, and sit back and yeah, wait for the next video from the Dan Cave. So thank you for watching, see you all soon, bye bye for now.